Welcome back to Prophecy in the Bible. Today's topic is Transfiguration and what it means. Now, we're going to be doing so by taking a look at the Gospel of Mark, chapter 9, verses 2 through 10. And we're going to see in the text that what the apostles have witnessed was referred to as the Transfiguration of Jesus. Now, Transfiguration in the Oxford Dictionary is defined as a complete change of form or appearance into a more beautiful or spiritual state. So what Peter, James, and John witnessed was Jesus turning into his glorified state. Now, in the Greek, transfigured is metamorphotite, where we get the word metamorphosis. Again, changing into another form. The example we can give is like a caterpillar that emerges from a cocoon into a beautiful butterfly. So let's now go to the Gospel of John, chapter 9, and begin at verse 2. After 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James, and John with him and led them up a high mountain where they were all alone. There he was transfigured before them. Now, one of the first things I want to bring out is the apostles themselves, Peter, James, and John. We find that they had a particularly close relationship with Jesus. They were present really during his most intimate moments, like, for example, the raising of Jairus' daughter in the Gospel of Mark, chapter 5, and during Jesus' time of sorrow in the Garden of Gethsemane, which is found in Matthew 26. Now, the other thing I want to bring forth is the idea of a high mountain. Mountains seem to have some spiritual significance with God. For example, the law was given to Moses on a mountain, which was, of course, Mount Sinai. And Christ delivered the Beatitudes on a mount, which we found in Matthew 5, 3 through 11. So where else would you see Jesus in his glorified body, but again, up on the top of this high mountain? Okay, let's go on to verse 3. His clothes became dazzling white, whiter than anyone in the world could bleach them. Now, when you think of white, it suggests light. And of course, Christ is the light of the world. So it seems that whenever someone comes in contact with God, it shows as light. And an example of this could be Moses' face after coming down from Mount Sinai and receiving the stone tablets in Exodus 34:29. So again, something very miraculous is going on here, and it has to do with the presence of God. And we're looking again at Christ in his glorified body. Let's go on to verse 4. And there appeared before them Elijah and Moses, who were talking with Jesus. Now, Moses, as we know, is the lawgiver, and Elijah is the prophet of prophets. Now, we find that some scholars believe that these two are the two witnesses spoken of in the book of Revelation, chapter 11, verses 3 through 12. Now, they could also be referred to as the two sons of oil. They also could be referred to as the two olive trees. All of these seem to refer to the two witnesses that will be in the book of Revelation. We look at Moses. He represents the Old Testament and the promise of salvation, which was soon to be fulfilled by Christ's death on the cross and his resurrection. Elijah, on the other hand, is the appointed restorer of all things. So it's very probable, and though we cannot say for certain, but it's very probable that they were discussing God's salvation plan on that mount. And in the context of the narrative, I think that interpretation seems reasonable. It is just like the lifting of a veil to be able to look into the spiritual realm. And I think a great example of that could be found in the Old Testament, where we had Elisha and his companion. They were up on a mountain and they saw a great army in the valley below. And the servant of Elisha was frightened. And Elisha then asked God to open that veil in order to show this great army of God that was much greater than that army below, to give confidence to Elisha's servant that battle would be won, and of course would be won by God alone. And that should, of course, give confidence to us as well, too, with all that goes on in this world, to know that God is indeed watching over us and, of course, is in control. Okay, let's go on to the next verse. Peter said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." Now, again, these are tabernacles that he's referring to, and maybe it's because he had thought that they can then use these as communication with each one of those, Moses, Elijah, and of course Jesus himself. But as it goes on to say in verse 6, he did not know what to say, they were so frightened. Verse 7, then a cloud appeared and enveloped them, and a voice came from the cloud, "This is my son, in whom I love. Listen to him." And of course, that's really wise words to us as well, too, that whenever we hear the voice of God, the voice of Christ, that we should indeed take notice, listen to him, and not only to listen, but to do whatever it is that he asks of us. Okay, let's go on to verse 8. Suddenly, when they looked around, they no longer saw anyone with them except Jesus. And there was a sudden change. So we see this cloud that's there. And a cloud is frequently a symbol of God's presence to protect and guide. And again, we can think of the Exodus, where you had the cloud that protected them by day from the heat. And at nighttime, there was a pillar of fire that guided their steps in the darkness. And again, there's a lesson to be learned there too, because God is our protection. He is that cloud by day, and he also lights the night in order to show us in which direction we should go in our lives, which will lead us again into the eternity. Okay, let's go on to verse 9. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus gave them order not to tell anyone what they had seen until the Son of Man had risen from the dead. They kept the matter to themselves, discussing what rising from the dead meant. Now, as Jews, they were familiar with the doctrine of the resurrection, but it was the resurrection of the Son of Man that was something that baffled them. And this had to do, again, because of their theology, they had no place for this idea of a suffering and dying Messiah. Their idea of a Messiah was one that was going to lead them in battle to defeat the enemy here on earth, at this time particularly the Romans, and to bring in the kingdom as it once had been under David. It's really too bad that their minds really were not tuned into Isaiah 53 and also to the suffering servant of Isaiah chapters 40 through 55. Then indeed they would have understood exactly God's plan and what it is that Jesus had come to earth for. So, to conclude, what does this all mean? Well, we just saw that the apostles has witnessed what was about to take place. That is, that Christ would raise from the tomb in his glorified body and would then be seated at the right hand of the Father, where he would become the light of the world and ultimately our salvation. So I hope you enjoyed this message today, and I ask that you please give a thumbs up, that you please subscribe, and even more importantly, that you please share this word with others, because I need you to help expand this ministry. It's so very important because there are so many people out there that are starved for the word of God. In fact, to quote Amos 8:11, that the famine in the end times would not be for bread, but for hearing the word of God. So thank you again. I hope you have a wonderful week, and I hope to see you very, very soon. Thank you.